What if the person you held closest transformed into the one who inflicted your deepest wound? I'm Eleanor Walsh, and I never foresaw a battle not only for my self-respect, but for my very liberty. This tale is difficult to share. Yet, if you're here, please remain with me. Before we begin, subscribe and tell us where you're viewing globally. My vision of aging involved peaceful afternoons and tranquil moments, tea, birdsong in the garden, and finally finishing a book or two. What I didn't foresee was that growing old would feel like a slow disappearance, each choice eroding my existence. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I am years old, and until a few months ago, I resided solely in the residence my husband Richard and I constructed together in the Portland, Oregon suburbs. Every blossom in the garden held a memory. The kitchen still carried the scent of his morning brew. I wasn't prepared to depart. I wasn't compelled to depart. I had stumbled over a small rug in the lounge. Nothing serious. I sustained slight bruising, but my mind remained sharp, my steps steady, my identity intact. However, that single incident provided all the justification my son Daniel required. He arrived early the next morning, with an unfamiliar expression in his gaze, cold, detached. He didn't inquire about my condition. He entered with a brief, businesslike manner, speaking in precise points. "Mom, we've located an excellent facility. It's time. It's optimal for everyone." I chuckled, assuming a jest. But he showed no humor. "Daniel," I stated, "I'm staying put. I'm well. This is my dwelling." But he had already completed all necessary arrangements. My belongings were packed. The legal documents were signed. I stood in the corridor, observing two unknown individuals moving my containers. My chest constricted. Breathing became difficult. This couldn't be happening. I attempted to protest, to resist, but his expression, as if I were merely a project or a problem needing supervision, choked off my words. "You fell," he declared. "You might have fractured your hip. You live alone. It's too precarious, and frankly, I lack the time to constantly monitor you." He spoke not with malice, but with pure efficiency. That, somehow, made it worse. They transported me in a van. I wasn't even permitted to ride in his vehicle. I recall the profound, chilling quiet that settled deep within me as we departed from the only existence I had known. The establishment was pristine, contemporary, featuring large windows and walls painted in neutral shades, but it carried a faint aroma of disinfectant, and something I can only label as forsakenness, a quiet you cannot comprehend unless you have lived it. I remember perching on the edge of the unfamiliar bed in the room assigned to me. My designation was on a sticker affixed to the entry, like a parcel or a misplaced article finally put into storage. I waited for Daniel to utter something. Perhaps an apology, a word of comfort, but all he offered was, "I'll check in later this week. Don't worry, Mom. You'll be comfortable here." Then he departed. Just like that. I didn't weep immediately. I simply sat, observing my surroundings. The walls were bare, my possessions reduced to a single bag. The dwelling I had filled with memories now existed only in my thoughts. I wasn't old enough to forget things, but I was old enough to be forgotten. That night, I lay in a bed that wasn't mine, listening to the gentle hum of the corridor's fluorescent lighting. I reflected on Richard, on how we once joked about growing old separately, how we vowed to always care for each other. Now he was gone, and my son had discarded me like I was insignificant. But I wasn't insignificant. Not yet. Something stirred within me that evening, a faint spark of an emotion I hadn't experienced in a long time. Not anger, not even sorrow. It was the spark of silent defiance. They presumed I was finished, but they had no clue what I was about to undertake. I gazed at the ceiling until dawn, planning, meticulously arranging everything. The next morning, I awoke to the soft sound of wheeled carts moving down the hallway. Medicine carts, I would later discover. That, and the occasional shuffle of shoes. It was the sort of environment where even the passage of time seemed dulled. My door was slightly ajar, and I could hear someone coughing from the adjacent room. The scent of scrambled eggs and overbrewed coffee wafted in. I dressed slowly, each motion a reminder that I retained agency. When I stepped into the corridor, staff members greeted me with polite nods and strained smiles. Not genuine warmth or recognition, simply routine. I was part of the furniture now. The communal space was filled with hushed conversations and television noise. No one looked up. No one inquired about my name. Some stared blankly at game shows. Others dozed, plastic cups of juice untouched beside them. I stood there, feeling unseen. I settled in a corner by the window. The sky was gray. A squirrel scampered along the outside fence and paused to peer in. For a moment, I envied it, free to roam wherever it wished. No paperwork necessary. Daniel didn't call that day or the next. It wasn't until the fourth day that he appeared. His shirt was neatly tucked, as if he'd come directly from work, which, knowing him, was likely true. He took a seat opposite me in the lounge, not even bothering to feign eye contact. "I brought your insurance documents," he stated, handing over a pile I hadn't requested, "and a few pictures for your bedside table." There were 3. One of him as a child, one of Richard holding Daniel as a baby, and one of me, cropped from a family holiday photo as an afterthought. I gazed at them in silence. "Is there anything you require?" he inquired. His voice held that particular edge, the tone people adopt when they wish to seem kind but hope you'll decline. I wanted to ask him why. Why this? Why now? Why couldn't he simply check on me occasionally, like a decent son? But I already knew his response. "This is simpler." So, I remained silent. "You're quiet," he observed. "I'm thinking," I responded. He appeared uneasy, as if even my slight resistance unsettled him. Then he uttered something I will never forget. "It's not that I don't care, Mom, but you've had your time. Now allow me to manage things." Had my time? As if life came with an expiration date, as if I had nothing left to experience, to offer, or to feel. He departed after 10 minutes. No embrace. No declaration of affection. He simply walked out as if completing a chore. The subsequent week passed in a haze. Meals served at fixed intervals. Bingo games with irrelevant prizes. I attempted to smile at the other residents, but most were lost in their own quietude. Others were too far gone to recall their own names. That's when I grasped the cruelest aspect of this place wasn't the monotony. It was the obliteration. They didn't just strip your autonomy. They stripped your identity. No one here knew I once worked as a librarian, that I played piano for Richard every Sunday morning, that I baked pies from scratch, that I had read every Steinbeck novel twice. To them, I was just a room number, a fall hazard, just another elderly woman whose era had passed. Until one afternoon, a nurse I hadn't encountered before entered, carrying a clipboard and a gentle smile. Her hair was neatly tied back, her uniform clean, but her eyes conveyed a weariness only someone burdened for too long could comprehend. "Mrs. Walsh?" she asked. "Hi, I'm Marissa. I'll be checking on you this week." I nodded. She sat down, abandoning the usual distance most staff maintained. "Is there anything you want me to know about you?" she inquired. It was such a simple query, yet no one had posed it since my arrival. I looked at her for a moment, uncertain how to reply. Then I stated, "I enjoy crossword puzzles. I make a delicious lemon meringue pie, and I still remember the fragrance of my husband's shaving cream." Marissa smiled. "That's good. I'd like to know more." And just like that, something shifted. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't feigning interest. She truly saw me. She returned the next day. And the next. We chatted. We laughed. She brought me tea from the staff room when the dining area ran out. She addressed me as Eleanor instead of Mrs. Walsh. And she recalled the name of my favorite singer from the 70s. She spoke about her daughter, about her mother who suffered from Alzheimer's, and about working night shifts to cover additional hours. She never complained, but her voice carried weight. Slowly, she became the sole reason I didn't feel completely invisible. I still longed for my residence. I missed Richard. And I still felt betrayed. But for the first time since being confined to this place, I wasn't just waiting to vanish. I was observing, listening, and discerning who remained loyal and who never truly had been. Because somewhere in that quiet, I was beginning to grasp something significant. This wasn't merely a care home. This was the arena for a conflict I hadn't realized I was about to wage. I started noticing the minor details first. The staff's double knock before entering. The way certain residents gazed blankly. Their life stories imprisoned behind tired eyes. The way people ceased asking questions once they decided you were just old. But with Marissa, it was different. She looked beyond the wrinkles, beyond the scheduled medicines, and the chart on the entry. She listened when I spoke, not with pity, but with respect, as if I still mattered. Every morning, she made time for me, even during busy periods. She'd peek her head into my room and say, "Morning, Eleanor. Are you well today?" Just those few words gave my day purpose. She treated me as a person, not a file. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel's last visit. Not that I anticipated much. My phone lay on the bedside table, silent. No calls, no messages, not even a quick check-in. Yet there I was, recounting tales to a nurse half my age, as if she were my only remaining family. Marissa possessed a warm, genuine laugh, the kind that sometimes caught me by surprise. She shared stories about her little girl, Mia, who had just turned 6, about her love for peanut butter sandwiches, and her aversion to bedtime. She insists I leave the hallway light on. Marissa mentioned one evening as we sat by the small garden behind the establishment. Says it keeps the nightmares away. I smiled. "Smart girl. Smarter than me most days," she replied, her voice cracking slightly. She averted her gaze, brushing imaginary fluff from her sleeve. I didn't press, but I noted her hands, slightly calloused. Nails neatly trimmed the hands of someone who had to manage everything herself. Later, she revealed her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years prior. Marissa was 29 then. She had taken on 2 jobs to manage expenses. She had to move her mother into her apartment because she couldn't afford a facility. "And your husband?" I gently inquired. She offered a hollow smile. "He left when I told him I wouldn't place my mom in a home. Said he wasn't prepared to bear that kind of burden." That kind of burden? I understood the sentiment. I carried it too. Every day since Richard passed. That night, I lay in bed contemplating her sacrifices, the isolation, the way she smiled even with the weight of the world on her shoulders. And I considered how little Daniel seemed to comprehend about responsibility, loyalty, or affection. The contrast was unbearable. One morning after breakfast, I asked Marissa if she could assist me in locating my lawyer's contact information. She blinked, surprised, but didn't question me, merely nodded. "Of course, I'll bring you a phone and a quiet spot for the call." I could discern it in her gaze. She didn't wish to intrude, but I knew she sensed a larger narrative beginning. It took less than 5 minutes. My lawyer, James Palmer, had served as our family attorney for years. He recognized my voice instantly. "I need to amend my will," I informed him, "and I'd like to initiate paperwork for an adult adoption." There was a pause. "Eleanor, are you certain?" I've never been more positive. That same afternoon, I composed 2 letters, one to Daniel, brief, cold, and factual, and one to Marissa. That one I sealed and concealed inside my bedside table drawer. I wasn't ready to give it to her yet. But when the moment arrived, I wanted her to know. She wasn't just a nurse. She was family now. I didn't inform her that day or the next. Instead, we maintained our routine, discussing books, her daughter's spelling assignments, the weather. But something within me had changed. I no longer felt like a passive spectator in this environment. I had a renewed sense of purpose, a silent undertaking, a legacy to redefine. Because if Daniel imagined he could dictate the conclusion of my narrative without even asking me, he was about to discover just how mistaken he was, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice to accomplish it. It was early October when the foliage outside the facility turned a vibrant, rusty red. I recall gazing out the window one morning, watching them fall like forgotten documents, drifting slowly to the earth. Something about the quietness of it echoed how my life had been gradually diminishing, piece by piece, while no one seemed to notice except Marissa. That day, she brought me a mug of chamomile infusion, real chamomile, not the powdered variety. She had found it at a discount shop on her route to work. "I thought of you," she stated. "Smells like something you'd appreciate." And it did. It smelled like my former kitchen, like Sunday mornings with Richard reading the newspaper while I prepared cinnamon rolls. We sat together by the window, simply observing the trees for a while. She appeared more tired than usual, but still maintained that gentle, steady composure. That was Marissa's unique quality. Regardless of her own difficulties, she made you feel like you were the most important presence during those brief minutes together. She informed me Mia had fallen ill the previous night. Fever, sore throat. She had remained awake all night, soothing her back, offering water, holding her small hand. "It's nothing serious, just a virus," she assured me, but I could detect the strain in her voice, the exhaustion, the apprehension that creeps in when you're managing everything alone. I inquired, "Do you ever get a break?" She smiled, but her eyes didn't reflect it. "I'll rest when she's grown." "Right now?" she requires me. Something clicked in me then. A realization, a silent validation of everything I'd been sensing. It wasn't just admiration. It was recognition. I saw myself in her, the younger me who had once cradled Daniel through countless sleepless nights, the woman who sacrificed weekends, holidays, and career advancements for her kin. The distinction? I did all that and ended up in a place like this. But Marissa, she merited better. Later that day, I contacted James, my lawyer, again. I finalized the alteration to my will. Half of my estate, encompassing the house, savings, and remaining investments, would go to Marissa Carter. No fanfare, no public announcement, just a legal promise. It was the first instance since Richard's passing that I felt I was undertaking something meaningful again. Over the subsequent days, I maintained a diary, a genuine one, leather-bound, with pages that smelled of old bookshops. I penned letters to Marissa, to Mia, even one to myself. I poured in everything. My recollections, my regrets, the betrayal that still resonated from Daniel's voice when he uttered, "You've had your time." Each word felt like mending a wound. One evening, I invited Marissa to join me in the garden behind the facility. The air was cool, the sun descending low behind the trees. I offered her the seat beside me and presented her with a small envelope. She blinked. "What's this?" "Not for now," I responded. "For when it truly matters." She looked at me, truly looked. "You're not unwell, are you?" I laughed softly. "No, dear. I'm just awakened now." We sat in silence after that, our shoulders nearly touching. I don't believe she comprehended the magnitude of what had just transpired. That I had just reshaped my legacy, not from fury, but from clarity, because sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the ones who carry your heart. And as the light diminished and the first stars appeared in the sky, I found peace with something significant. If Daniel had abandoned me, then I had every right to offer myself to someone who truly saw me, who valued me, who remained. I didn't know then how swiftly events would unfold, but I sensed it, even then. A tempest was approaching, and I was finally prepared to face it. It was well past midnight when I awoke to the sound of hushed voices down the corridor. Most nights, the facility became utterly silent after 9 o'clock. Lights dimmed, residents tucked away in their rooms like forgotten volumes on a dusty shelf. But this night was different. I slid out of bed, draped a shawl around my shoulders, and opened the entry just enough to observe the hallway bathed in soft yellow illumination. At the far end, near the administrator's office, I saw Daniel. I froze. He was supposed to be out of town. He hadn't visited in weeks. Yet there he stood, tense, gesturing sharply as he conversed with a man in a gray suit, Someone I didn't recognize. Their voices were low, but one phrase drifted down the hall like smoke. If she changes that will, I lose everything. I retreated into the shadows. The lawyer, because that's who the other man had to be, sighed. It's her legal right, Daniel. You can't prevent her from doing it. She's not thinking clearly, Daniel snapped. She's alone, confused, probably being manipulated by some staff member. My blood ran cold. He was talking about Marissa. I want a psychological assessment. Something official, he stated. If she's declared incompetent, the will cannot be altered. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they might hear it. I'm not going to let her hand over my inheritance to some nurse, he hissed. She owes me. Owes him. He genuinely believed that my existence, my finances, my dwelling, all belonged to him by right. That he was entitled to the sum of my being because of biology. Then the lawyer inquired, "Are you sure you wish to pursue this course?" Daniel's reply was immediate. "Do it." I backed into my room, softly closed the entry, and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. I wasn't sure what hurt more, what I'd overheard, or the fact I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been calculating, strategic, but now I saw the truth unmasked. He didn't care about my welfare. He cared about control. And that's when it struck me. I had always pondered the night Richard died. It happened so abruptly. He had been in his office late, reviewing financial records while I was out visiting a friend. When I returned home, he was already gone. A heart attack, they said. No one present to assist. No. I recalled asking Daniel if he had spoken to his father that day. He said no. But now I wasn't certain. The next morning, I behaved as if nothing had occurred. Daniel didn't know I had overheard. He smiled thinly, handed me a container of herbal teas I hadn't requested, and stated, "Thought you'd like these." I nodded, feigning ignorance. That afternoon, I asked one of the newer assistants, a timid girl named Hannah, if she could ascertain which nurse had worked the front desk that night. She hesitated, then whispered. I found Kristen folding laundry in the rear hallway. I waited until no one else was nearby. "I need to ask you something confidentially." She looked up, startled. "Okay. You saw my son here last night, didn't you?" Kristen paused, then slowly nodded. "And he wasn't visiting me, was he?" She swallowed. "No. He was in the office for a long time, arguing." "Did you hear anything?" Her voice lowered. "Only a little. Something about documents and someone being declared unfit." I thanked her, then walked away with the burden settling on my shoulders like lead. Back in my room, I stared at the photograph Daniel had left weeks ago. One of him as a boy, smiling in his Little League uniform. The child I nurtured. The boy I comforted during thunderstorms. The teenager I pardoned when he falsified grades. The man I had defended even when Richard cautioned me he was becoming too self-centered, too cold. I had loved him without condition. But now I understood that affection had always been a one-way path. And then, like a film reel playing backward, memories flooded back, quick and sharp. Richard's phone call that day, Daniel's late arrival at the hospital with dry eyes and no sense of urgency, the ensuing quiet. Had he? I didn't want to complete that thought, but the answer was clear. He hadn't aided his father, not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. He allowed Richard to perish so he wouldn't have to confront the financial repercussions of the company's liabilities, the liabilities Daniel had a role in creating, and now he was coming for me, too. But I wasn't Richard. And I wasn't going to be silenced quietly. I reached into my drawer and retrieved the envelope, the one I'd prepared for Marissa. It was time to deliver it, because conflict had been declared, and I had no intention of losing. It happened more swiftly than I ever imagined. One moment I was seated in the garden with Marissa, watching the wind carry leaves across the path like echoes from another existence, and the next, I was instructed to pack my possessions again. Only this time, I wasn't moving to another room or a different section of the building. I was being relocated to a psychiatric ward. The nurse who conveyed the message was new, polite, but robotic. She delivered it as if reading from a menu. Mrs. Walsh, the attending physician has recommended a transfer for observation. A few days just to ensure your well-being. Safety from what? I inquired. She blinked. There have been concerns about confusion, some unusual conversations, possible signs of delusion. I laughed, short and sharp. You mean me realizing my son's a predator? She didn't respond. 2 orderlies appeared 10 minutes later with a chair on wheels. I told them I didn't require it. They said it was standard procedure. I didn't resist. Not because I accepted it, but because I knew resistance would only bolster the falsehood. If I raised my voice, I'd be labeled irrational. If I refused to cooperate, they'd use it as proof. I needed to remain composed. They wheeled me down a hallway I'd never observed before, through a secured entry with a code I didn't possess. The instant it clicked shut behind me, something deep inside me fractured. The air was different, sterile, heavier. The walls, a muted shade of green that felt more like confinement than care. No pictures, no music, just the quiet hum of despair. My new room was smaller. The bed was fastened to the floor. A single window with reinforced glass. No sharp items. No phone. No Marissa. I asked the nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a tight hairstyle, how long I'd remain there. Until the evaluation is complete, she replied. And who authorized it? She hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. Your son made the request, she finally stated, with a supporting declaration from Dr. Levon. Levon, the facility's medical director, a man I'd spoken to 3 times briefly and never once confided in. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, trying to suppress the fury rising in my chest. So, this was Daniel's next maneuver. He couldn't revoke the will on his own, but if I was declared mentally unfit, legally incompetent, then everything I'd strived so hard to protect could be overturned, and I would be silenced, literally confined. The first night in that room was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. The lights outside my door remained on all night, spilling in through the gap like a spotlight. They brought me pills. I declined to take them. They attempted to persuade me. Said I needed rest. That I was agitated. I wasn't agitated. I was aware. I thought of Richard, of how he must have felt, alone in that office, clutching his chest and dialing the number of the one person he thought would save him. And I thought of Daniel, looking at the device and choosing not to respond. I cried that night, not from terror, but because I realized how little I meant to him. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstruction. But then I remembered Marissa. Her hands, her laughter, her commitment. And I knew she wouldn't let this go. The next day, a social worker arrived, a young man named Kevin. He introduced himself with a clipboard and a soft tone. I'm here to converse, Mrs. Walsh. Just standard inquiries. Don't waste your breath, I asserted. You're not here for my advantage. You're here to validate documentation. He blinked. That's not true. Then allow me to make a telephone call. He hesitated. That's not permitted without medical professional approval. I stared at him. So much for entitlements. He departed 15 minutes later, clearly shaken. I didn't provide the performance they anticipated. I didn't rant or weep. I simply articulated the truth. Calm, cold, clear. They desired a breakdown. I offered them self-possession. Later that evening, while I pretended to nap, I heard voices outside my entry. She's lucid, one of the nurses whispered. Honestly, more coherent than half the staff. Orders are orders, the other replied. I felt a glimmer of hope. Not everyone was oblivious. Still, I was ensnared. And time was dwindling. But I knew Marissa. And I knew something Daniel didn't. He had underestimated me. But he had no idea what I'd instructed her. The first time Marissa attempted to visit me after my relocation, they turned her away. She recounted that to me later. She had rushed in during her shift, still in her scrubs, her identification tag swinging. her heart likely pounding harder than she'd ever admit. She inquired of the front desk nurse where I had been transferred and was met with blank stares. "Mrs. Walsh is no longer under your care," they informed her. "The matter is being handled internally." She told me her hands started shaking, that she felt like screaming but didn't. She knew better. Marissa was astute. She understood the game they were playing. She just didn't know the full extent of Daniel's influence. But she started investigating. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was on a mission. She contacted the lawyer I had been working with, James Palmer, and demanded a meeting. When he hesitated, she sent him the letter I had composed and sealed weeks earlier, the one I had placed in my drawer, like a seed I prayed would flourish when the moment arrived. That letter transformed everything. James called her back within an hour. He met her in his office the next morning, and from what Marissa later disclosed, she wasted no time with pleasantries. She told him everything about the change in my will, Daniel's increasing pressure, the sudden declaration of my instability out of nowhere. She also brought something else with her, an audio recording. 2 weeks earlier, during a routine corridor conversation, Daniel had been speaking to the facility's administrator near the nurses' station. He hadn't noticed that Marissa had her phone in her coat pocket, and he hadn't known she had accidentally pressed record while reaching for a writing instrument. In that recording, his voice was distinct. He stated the words plainly. "She's merely isolated, easily swayed. That nurse, she's deceiving her. Once I have her deemed unfit, the will reverts to its original state." That audio clip was more than enough to trigger alarms. But Marissa didn't stop there. She located Kristen, the night shift nurse, who had witnessed Daniel at the facility after hours. Kristen was hesitant initially, fearful of losing her employment, but Marissa told her the truth. That if she remained silent, she'd be complicit in something worse than neglect. Kristen agreed to sign a deposition. Then came the medical records. Marissa observed discrepancies in the evaluation ordered by Dr. Levon. Dates that didn't align, statements attributed to me that I never uttered, medications I was supposedly non-compliant with, even though I had never once refused a prescription prior to the psychiatric transfer. She collected everything, statements, recordings, medical inconsistencies, and brought them to James. Together, they filed for an emergency court hearing. They labeled it what it was: elder abuse. And while all that transpired externally, I was still inside that locked section, pacing the dimensions of my room like a trapped creature. Every day they presented pills. Every day I declined them, my chart filled with terms like uncooperative and defensive, as if I were being difficult purely for amusement. But I knew the truth. They desired me numb. They desired me quiet. They desired me gone. I didn't know what Marissa was doing. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. But I believed in her because she was the sole individual in that establishment who had ever looked me in the eye and seen a human being. Not a patient, not a burden, not a bank account. And when they finally informed me I had a court hearing scheduled, I knew she had discovered a pathway through. They permitted me to bathe the morning of the hearing, provided me with clean attire, offered a cup of coffee I didn't trust. A nurse entered to brush my hair, attempting to make me appear presentable, but I cared little for appearances. I was preparing for conflict. And I wasn't entering that courtroom as a victim. I was entering as someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore everything to articulate. They transported me in a van with darkened windows, as if I were some kind of offender. 2 orderlies sat in the front, discussing their lunch plans while I sat in the back, hands clasped in my lap, pretending not to listen. But I heard everything. I heard how they spoke of me. The old lady with the nurse issue. I heard them jest about how I must be feigning it just to gain attention. And I committed every word to memory, because soon their words would carry weight. The courthouse wasn't far, just a modest gray edifice, with a tattered flag outside, and too many parking spaces. I was guided through a side entrance, away from public view, as if I were something shameful to be concealed. But inside that small courtroom, I saw her, Marissa. She sat near the front, wearing a simple navy blouse, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she observed my entry, her eyes filled with emotion. She didn't speak, just nodded as if to convey, "I told you I'd come." And then I saw Daniel, seated with his legal counsel, as self-satisfied as ever, his suit impeccable, his demeanor practiced. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. He thought he'd already triumphed. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a direct manner. She looked at me as if she hadn't yet formed an opinion. That offered me hope. James stood and began. He presented the facts slowly, systematically, like a precise surgical tool, not a blunt instrument. He introduced Marissa's audio recording, Kristen's statement, the inconsistencies in my medical records, and then he played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the chamber, cold, calculated, despicable. "She's merely isolated, easily swayed. That nurse, she's deceiving her. Once I have her deemed unfit, the will reverts to its original state." The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's lawyer attempted to object, but it was too late. The words were already in the air, tainting everything. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. "I may be old," I declared, "but I am not confused. I am not senile, and I am not finished." I looked directly at Daniel. "I placed my trust in you. I loved you. I forgave you for so many things I shouldn't have. But when you allowed your father to die, when you disregarded his cry for assistance so you wouldn't be held accountable for your own missteps, you crossed a boundary I cannot and will not pardon." Gasps echoed. Daniel turned pale. I continued, "This isn't about funds. It isn't even about the will. It's about self-respect. It's about being acknowledged, being heard, being human. And if my existence is worth nothing more to my own son than a monetary value, then I will spend what remains of it with someone who treats me as if I matter." Marissa's eyes welled with tears. She quietly reached for a tissue. The judge called for a recess. When we reconvened, her voice was firm, resolute. "Mrs. Walsh is of sound mind and full legal capacity. This court finds the petition for guardianship, filed by Mr. Daniel Walsh, to be baseless and, frankly, disturbing." She turned to Daniel. "You should consider yourself fortunate she doesn't pursue criminal charges." And just like that, I was free. Free from the confining walls. Free from the oppressive quiet. Free from the son who had abandoned all goodness and decency. Outside the courthouse, Marissa embraced me. Not forcefully, just enough. Just right. "You achieved it," she whispered. "No," I responded. "We achieved it, but deep down, I knew the true conflict was only beginning, because the law might have cleared my name, but I was far from done solidifying my legacy." The morning after the hearing, I stood before the mirror in my former room, my actual room at the facility. The same beige walls, the small window that allowed slivers of morning light, the photograph of Richard and me still tucked into the corner of the dressing table. But something had changed. I had changed. They tried to break me. Daniel tried to erase me, but I was still here. Marissa entered just before breakfast, carrying a tray with pancakes and fresh strawberries, my favorite. She said nothing at first, simply placed the tray down and pulled up a chair. Her eyes were tired, but her smile was broad. "Victory pancakes," she declared. I chuckled. We earned them. That day, the staff treated me differently, with a little more deference. Some avoided eye contact, especially those who had followed directives blindly. Others offered apologies in quiet, nervous tones. I didn't harbor resentment, but I remembered everything. Daniel, on the other hand, disappeared. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send his lawyer to rectify the situation. It was as if he'd vanished into the shadows, hoping to outlast the storm. But I wasn't finished with him. That same week, I finalized the adoption documents with James. Marissa Carter officially, legally, became my daughter. On paper, in court, in spirit. The procedure was surprisingly straightforward. A judge inquired if this was truly my desire. "Yes," I stated, without hesitation. Because what defines family isn't genetics. It's who appears when you're broken. It's who advocates for you when everyone else departs. Daniel discovered the adoption the following Monday. He sent me an email. A single sentence. "You'll regret this." I deleted it. He wasn't enraged because I gave Marissa my assets. He was enraged because I gave her my affection. The next few days, I felt lighter. I spent more time outdoors. I laughed more. I helped Marissa organize Mia's birthday, an outdoor celebration with balloons, small cakes, and paper crowns. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I discovered an old scarf Richard had given me. I held it against my cheek and closed my eyes, recalling his voice, his quiet strength. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered. And in that instant, I felt something within me settle. Something that had been restless for too long. But the peace was fleeting. One morning, James called. "Daniel is attempting to challenge the will again," he stated. "This time, alleging undue influence. He's hiring a new team. He wants it all reversed." Of course. He did. A serpent doesn't alter its nature, it simply sheds its skin. But this time, I was prepared. We possessed recordings, witnesses, medical verification of my mental clarity, legal guardianship of my own estate, and now, we had the adoption. He couldn't touch a single dollar without dismantling the entire scheme he'd constructed. Still, the apprehension returned because no matter how strong I felt, a part of me still ached. He was my son, he was my infant once, and now he was the antagonist of my narrative. That night, I sat with Marissa in the garden. We watched the sun dip below the trees, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Mia ran around, chasing fireflies. Her laughter carried through the air like melody. I wish I could say, "I don't care," I murmured. But I do. I still care. Marissa didn't respond immediately. She reached for my hand, warm and steady. "You don't have to stop caring," she stated. "You just have to stop letting him hurt you." I would always love the small boy Daniel once was, but I would no longer lament the man he became, because I had a new chapter to experience now, and I had a new family to experience it with. The decisive confrontation was approaching, and when it did, I'd be ready to conclude the book. The courtroom felt colder this time. Perhaps it was the tension in the atmosphere, or perhaps it was because I understood precisely what Daniel was attempting to do again. He wasn't merely contesting the will, he was trying to obliterate everything I'd accomplished, every measure I'd taken to safeguard my reputation, my dignity, and the one person who had supported me when everyone else disappeared. Marissa sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, now my legal daughter. Her hands were steady, but I could perceive the tension in her shoulders, as if she were prepared to spring into defense at any moment, like a soldier. Daniel, clad in another costly suit, didn't even glance my way. His lawyer, new, refined, arrogant, attempted to portray a scene of manipulation, that Marissa had preyed on an elderly woman, that I'd been coerced, that none of my decisions could be trusted. They invoked the age factor, they invoked the vulnerable senior factor, but they overlooked one crucial detail. I was still living, still present, still influential. I stood when called. My voice was clear, strong. I made every decision with full awareness of what I was doing, I asserted, looking directly at the judge. And I stand by them. I altered my will, not from confusion, but from clarity. I chose to bestow my legacy upon someone who earned it, not someone who presumed entitlement. The opposing lawyer smirked. "And what about your son? You're suggesting he merits nothing?" I didn't flinch. "I'm stating he merits exactly what he gave me in the final years of my existence." Silence. Distance. Disregard. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Then James, my lawyer, took the floor. He presented the adoption documents, legal, complete, indisputable. He presented Marissa's years of service, her flawless record, her unwavering allegiance. He reminded the court of Daniel's previous attempt to have me institutionalized, and then he delivered the ultimate blow, the audio recording again. Daniel's voice, smug and uncensored, speaking about manipulating the system to reclaim the will. The judge leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and sighed. "I've witnessed many unpleasant family disputes," she remarked. "But this is different. This is calculated malevolence disguised as concern." She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Walsh, not only do I deny your petition, but I am referring your conduct to the State Bar Association for review. If this courtroom permitted emotional compensation, you'd owe your mother far more than money." I couldn't help it. I allowed the tears to fall, not from sorrow, but from liberation. It was finished. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. But I didn't pause. Marissa and I walked hand in hand to the vehicle. We didn't need a public declaration. We didn't need the world to grasp it, because we understood. Back at the facility, I packed my possessions for the last time, not in secrecy, not in fear, but with elation. We were relocating to a small residence just outside of town, a modest dwelling with a garden I could tend again. Marissa referred to it as ours. Mia had already selected where her swing set would be placed. As I zipped up the final bag, I glanced around the room that had once felt like a confinement. It was just a space now, a chapter that had fulfilled its purpose. Before we left, I placed the old photograph of Richard and me in my bag. I looked at his face, his smile. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I didn't let him seize everything." Outside, Marissa gently sounded the horn from the car. I took one last look, then closed the entry behind me, and just like that, I departed. Not defeated, but renewed. Not forgotten, but chosen. The sun felt warm on my face as we drove into the driveway of our new home. It wasn't vast or opulent, just a simple cottage with pale blue window coverings and a porch swing already creaking in the soft air. But to me, it felt like a grand estate, because this time, I had selected it. No one had forced me here. No one had packed my items without my consent. I arrived on my own terms, and I brought with me the only individuals who had truly remained. Marissa assisted me out of the car while Mia ran ahead, laughing as she announced which sleeping area she desired. There were daisies in the front garden, already blooming. I smiled. Richard would have cherished this place. I hadn't received a word from Daniel since the verdict. No calls, no emails, nothing. A part of me kept anticipating a final plea or perhaps an apology, but none came, and that silence conveyed more than any words ever could. We unpacked slowly, savoring each moment. I positioned Richard's photograph on the mantelpiece. Marissa hung up drawings Mia had created in school. We filled the kitchen with aromas: cinnamon, basil, fresh bread. Life returned to my spirit in ways I didn't realize I still required. A week later, a letter arrived. Not from Daniel, but from his legal counsel. It was a formal notification. Daniel had declared insolvency. Apparently, his reputation had suffered after the court proceeding. His property ventures had begun to collapse. Investors were withdrawing. Word had circulated. You cannot perpetually conceal a heart like his. And just like that, the man who had attempted to steal everything from me lost everything himself. I didn't smile when I read it. I didn't gloat, but I did exhale deeply, completely, for the first time in years. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's observing your adversary fall without ever needing to exert effort. One afternoon, I sat on the back patio with Marissa. The air smelled of fresh greenery and warm earth. She was reading, and I was crocheting something for Mia's room. "Do you ever regret it?" she quietly inquired. "Giving me so much?" I looked up, surprised. "I didn't give you anything," I stated. "You earned it. Every single bit of it." She looked down, her eyes moist. "No one's ever told me that before." I reached over, took her hand in mine. "Well, become accustomed to it," I smiled. "You're bound to me now." That night, I dreamt of Richard. We were dancing in the living area, slow and playful, as we used to be. He was wearing those silly plaid slippers, and I could feel his hand on my waist as if he'd never left. When I awoke, birds were singing outside. The sun filtered through the window coverings. I could hear Mia giggling from her room. and I realized something. This was home. Not the structure, not the bricks or the furnishings, the sensation, the tranquility, the laughter, the affection. I had discovered my family, not by lineage, but in the ones who chose to remain. Daniel had squandered a fortune, but I had gained a future. And I wouldn't exchange places with him for all the money in the world. The garden was bathed in light. Golden afternoon sun streamed across the rows of fresh soil where I had just sown a handful of wildflower seeds with Mia. Her tiny hands had been covered in dirt, her face smudged, but her laughter, pure, unadulterated joy, still echoed in the breeze. I sat on the porch swing now, a glass of lemonade in my hand, watching her run across the lawn with her small butterfly net, pursuing nothing specific. And Marissa, she stood barefoot in the grass, smiling, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She appeared younger these days, lighter, as if some unseen burden had finally lifted from her shoulders. This was peace. This was healing. This was everything I'd been denied, and everything I had chosen to construct with the remnants. For so long, I believed aging meant losing parts of oneself. I thought it meant being obliterated, rendered invisible. I never imagined I'd be contending for my name, my worth, my voice, but I did contend. And I prevailed. Not with fury, not with vengeance, but with truth, with grace, with clarity. After the ruling, Daniel never contacted me again. Not to apologize, not to explain, just silence, and I permitted it to remain that way. There's a particular kind of grief that accompanies releasing someone you once loved unconditionally. It's quiet and gradual and personal, but it's essential. I don't despise him. I don't wish him suffering. I simply no longer grant him the power to define me. Instead, I channeled my energy into planting, into baking, into demonstrating to Mia how to prepare her first peach cobbler, into assisting Marissa in upgrading her nursing certification so she could establish a small private care service from home. We became something more than a household. We became a family, a genuine one, built not from shared genetics, but from shared struggles, from allegiance, from love in its purest manifestation. Every morning I awaken and select this existence, not because it's flawless, but because it's mine, and because I fought for it. I thought my narrative was concluding the day Daniel wheeled me into that facility. But I was mistaken. That was merely the commencement of my final act, the one I got to compose, the one that finishes with my hands in the earth, laughter in the air, and tranquility in my spirit. As the sun dipped lower, I reached over and plucked a single sunflower from the pot beside me. My favorite. Richard once told me sunflowers always gravitate toward the light. I think I finally understand his meaning. Because even after everything, the betrayal, the quiet, the isolation, I rediscovered the light. I allowed it to find me, and I followed it home. My kin may have abandoned me, but affection saved me. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments. Your perspective matters.